Chapter 6. The Jugurthine War. Part 1. A Turning Point. The year is 110 BCE. It's me. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you the stories of ancient history's greatest battles. Today we discuss the start of the First Jugurtha War between Rome and the Kingdom of Numidia. In the previous episode, we saw how Jugurtha defied the Roman Senate and its attempts at extortion. And so, as the people of Rome prepared for another year of gladiatorial games and chariot races, across the Mediterranean, war was being prepared. Our story begins in 116 BCE, when Gaius Marius, a man who would become one of the most famous Roman generals, set out for Africa. He was serving as a legate, that is, an officer subordinate to the proconsul under Quintus Caecilius Metellus Numidicus, whose task it was to subdue the troublesome king of Numidia. The trouble started after Rome had defeated Carthage in the Third Punic War. Metellus Numidicus, who had previously served as consul, was given command over this new province to restore order. But his brother, the elder Lucius Caecilius Metellus, who had been in charge of dividing up the spoils of war in the west, had annoyed King Jugurtha by refusing to award him territories that were promised by the Romans after the war. So Jugurtha declared war on Rome, and Metellus was sent to deal with him. Now when Metellus crossed into Numidia, he discovered what all of us old Africans know. You can't fight in the desert. There was no way he could conquer Numidia in a direct assault. So he decided to try something else. He went to the neighboring kingdoms of Massilia and Mauritania and concluded some treaties with them, which gave him some breathing room and, more importantly, allowed him to receive supplies. During these campaigns, Metellus earned the title Macer, which means blunt, referring to his slowness in battle. So with peace secured around him, Metellus returned to Rome to announce his victories and take a well-earned vacation, leaving Marius in charge of the army. This is where our story starts. As the two brothers prepared for their separate vacations, the Roman people were growing impatient with the stalemate in Numidia. There was a group of influential men called the Arpinums, who wanted peace with Jugurtha. But there was another group called the Populares who thought that Rome should be more aggressive and demanded that Metellus be replaced with someone more competent, like Marius. With the backing of the Populares, Marius began to criticize the conduct of the war, declaring that it was going badly, because the general was spending too much time partying in Rome and not enough time fighting to. Now, this was crafty campaigning on Marius' part. While he had been a successful general before, he was actually quite unpopular in Rome, because he was from a minor branch of the gens Julia and thus didn't have much political clout. By insulting Metellus, he was sticking it to the Optimates and endearing himself to the Populares. But then something unexpected happened. The aging elder Metellus died suddenly, perhaps from malaria, which he picked up while campaigning in Africa. This created a power vacuum in the province of the HRE, and Marius was perfectly positioned to step into the breach and take command. If he could just get past the Senate. You see, even though the Optimates were staunch supporters of Metellus, they also knew that the war was stagnating and that Rome needed a new commander. But they wanted someone pliable, someone who would come in and keep the peace rather than continue the costly war. At the top of their list was Gnaeus Octavius, who is currently pro-praetor in Macedonia and was known for his conservative views. But Marius beat them to the punch. Once again, he launched a propaganda campaign, this time against Octavius, claiming that he was only interested in the consulship to line his own pockets, and that he would never truly support the war effort until he got what he wanted. He kept needling the Senate until they made him consul. So in 107 BCE, Gaius Marius became the first plebeian to hold the consulship, and he used this new authority to set out for Africa and claim the Jugurthine throne for Rome. When he arrived, he found a disaster waiting for him. You see, after Metellus left for Rome, Jugurtha attacked and nearly annihilated the Roman garrison at Cirta, forcing the survivors to flee into the hills. Marius now found himself in command of an army without a base of operations, supplies, or equipment. But he rallied his troops and got to work. He chose a site close to the sea for his headquarters, near the modern town of Annaba, because he understood the importance of naval supply lines. Then he set about fixing the logistical problems that plagued In fact, he ordered all pack animals captured during the war to be brought to him, so that he could use them to transport goods. But Jugurtha was not willing to let Marius resupply his troops in peace. He harassed the Romans day and night with hit-and-run attacks, and even raided their camp at night. On one occasion, he almost got away with killing Marius, who was saved by a centurion. Still, Marius knew he couldn't defeat Jugurtha unless he fixed his logistical problems. So he set up supply depots throughout Numidia and strengthened his fortifications. He also reformed the Roman siege equipment, which was outdated, and he introduced the use of catapults. All the while, he continued to repel Jugurtha's attacks, patiently waiting for his moment. Then, Egat Italiano. While Jugurtha was away on campaign, Marius took his fortress, putting an end to Jugurtha's war of attrition. Next, he set about raising the siege of the Roman garrison at Cirta, which had been held by Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius, son of the aforementioned consular Metellus, who had been besieged for 3 years and was running low on food. The siege lasted for 5 months, and when it fell, the Romans found 30 elephants that the Numidians had captured earlier. Marius added these to his own war herd, which now numbered 80 elephants, and he used them to devastating effect throughout the war. Marius was now ready to hunt down Jugurtha and end the war once and for all. He led his army south, following the river toward Jugurtha's capital at Zama. But Jugurtha was too quick for him and reached Zama first. There he fortified the city walls and waited for Marius to come to him. After reaching Zama, Marius laid siege. But unlike the siege of Cirta, Jugurtha was able to supply his people and keep them in the fight. And so the siege dragged on for months. Finally, in the spring of 106 BCE, Marius managed to break into the city, but he soon realized that Jugurtha was not there. He had fled into the Numidian countryside, and so Marius pursued him, setting up camp along the river. But the Numidians were too quick for him and always managed to escape. One day, however, Jugurtha tried to ford the river with his elephant riders and was almost captured. From this point on, Marius was able to anticipate Jugurtha's moves and harass him at every turn. Finally, Jugurtha sent envoys to ask for a parley. When they met, Jugurtha offered to surrender himself if Marius agreed to spare his people. But Marius turned him down, saying that the Romans had already suffered too much for that. Instead, he proposed that Jugurtha surrender his kingdom in exchange for noble exile in Rome. Now, this was probably opportunistic on Marius' part, because he knew that the Senate would never allow Jugurtha to retain his kingdom, even if he had conquered it. But Jugurtha refused. He would rather die than surrender, and so Marius returned to his siege. We don't know exactly what happened next, but we do know that Jugurtha eventually surrendered. Perhaps he simply ran out of options. Maybe his people pressured him to end the bloodshed. Whatever the reason, when the news broke that Jugurtha had surrendered, the whole city erupted in cheers. When he paraded through the forum with his prisoner, Jugurtha looked haggard and broken, a far cry from the dashing young warrior he once was. The Romans, especially the Optimates, celebrated wildly, thinking that the worst was over. But Marius knew better. Jugurtha's lieutenants were still at large, and Rome had yet to collect any meaningful plunder. So as he prepared to march back to Rome to take his well-deserved victory lap, he left orders for his legate, Gaius Lucilius, to pursue Jugurtha's family and allies and bring them to justice. As the army marched out of Zama, word spread that Gaius Marius had betrayed Publius Sulpicius Rufus, the praetor whom Marius had displaced to take command in Africa, and had him murdered. But Marius wasn't finished. The war in Africa was over, but the war in Asia Minor was just beginning. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of Chapter 6. If you like this episode, please leave us a like and a comment telling us what you think. And if you haven't done so already, remember to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. See you next time.